and welcome back to Chess Openings Explains. My name is Caleb Denby, and today I will be filling in for Jim McLaughlin, who normally teaches this class, but is staying home today. Today, I wanted to go over an opening that I picked up over the past year or so, called the Ragozin. It's a very interesting line for Black against the Queen's Gambit, which allows Black to both fight for a very tactical game and equalize very quickly and very easily if White doesn't apply too much pressure. So to start with, let me just show you the first few moves. It starts with d4, and now of course there are actually a few move orders you can use to get there. The move order I use is to start with one knight f6. Now after c4 and e6, there are a variety of ways White can play. The two most common, knight c3 and knight f3, go into different lines of the Queen's Gambit. Knight c3 is a pretty common choice at the top level, and after d5, the fact that White has developed this knight to c3 gives him a bit more options in this opening. For example, c takes d5, e takes d5, and now since White has not developed this knight on g1, later, after some moves like bishop g5 and e3 and bishop d3, this knight might actually come to the e2 square rather than the f3 square. The downside to this, of course, is that it allows the bishop b4 Nimzo Indian defense, which of course has a very good reputation. It's very solid, very nice for Black to play to get a good equal game. So if knight c3 is on the board, and you do happen to play d5, you can still get into the Ragozin, but I just wanted to mention this little fact about the position here. And in fact, the Ragozin, would be difficult to achieve if White does go for one of these exchange lines. Bishop b4 here isn't quite as well respected as the normal Ragozin. So with that in mind, after knight c3, I would recommend going into the Nimzo. This is what I do in my own repertoire. But the move d5 is perfectly fine as well. With that in mind, though, knight f3 is now actually the more common move that I see and that is actually seen at the top level, I think. And the reason for that is it avoids this Nimzo Indian, which is really annoying. But what it does allow is after d5, now White will play knight c3 most often. And now, of course, you can get into the Ragozin with bishop b4. This is the starting position of the Ragozin defense. You pin this knight on c3, White has already developed this knight to f3, and Black has already played d5. This is how it's kind of distinct from the Nimzo Indian. And to start us off here, I wanted to take a look at this game between Wesley and Magnus Carlsen, which is pretty much as close to a perfect game of chess as you can get. It, of course, ended in a draw, but I wanted to include this game to show you how in the main lines, Black just equalizes very, very easily if White doesn't try to shake things up a little bit and make it interesting. The most common move in the Ragozin is actually to start with bishop g5 here. We'll take a look at some other options for White later on. Now I'm going to recommend h6 for Black. It's the most common move. And because White has not included c takes d5, bishop takes f6 is pretty much the only move, or at least by far the main move here. We're going to take this piece back with our queen, not fracturing our kingside pawns in this case. And now e3 is the main move. Queen a4 check is also playable there, but we're going to take a look at that in a different move order a little bit later on. Now, a very natural play for Black. Black simply castles. You'll see White play a move like rook c1. You'll see this a lot in Queen's Gambit openings. White delays developing this bishop, because then Black is going to capture on c4, gaining a tempo by making this piece move twice. And in fact, because White has played rook c1 and not moved the bishop, Black here really has nothing better than to take on c4. This is the main move, and this really is the move that shows that Black is going to be completely equal in this main line of the Ragozin. If you don't want to kind of blow things up in the center and want to keep the game going, Black does have a variety of other options. You can bring this rook to d8. You can play a move like c6 and just support the center. Play a move like knight d7 even. You can even play a move like knight c6 if you like, to try and challenge the center. And what these moves have in common here, these three moves at least, is that you're fighting for the e5 square. And that's really one of the two main breaks for Black in the Ragozin, is pushing this pawn forward to e5. What we'll see in this game, because white has played so non-aggressively, we'll say, keeping the queen back on d1, playing moves like rook c1, just super solid stuff. This allows black to just equalize with the move c5 instead. In the game, black captured on d4, on c4 rather, as I said, it's the main move. Bishop takes c4, and now the immediate c5 is really showing that black has no problems. White can castle, and now after c takes d4, we see knight takes d4, and bishop d7. In this game, white played queen b3, and now black really just needs to find one accurate move here to completely seal the deal and call this game pretty much a dead draw. Of course, we don't want to lose our b7 pawn. At the same time, we're not quite ready yet to give up this bishop on c3, because now the white pieces do have a bit more activity, and we still have these problems with b7. So the move black needs to find, as Magnus played in the game, is knight c6. And there are over 60 games here. I think white might have won once, black might have won like once or twice as well, and the rest were all drawn. And the fact is, there's just not much to play for here. White's best move is actually to take on c6, and it might look like tactically this removes the defender of this bishop, but thankfully for black, we have the move bishop takes c3, and with this insertion now, there's really nothing left. In this game, white took on b7, bishop takes c6 is required to save the bishop, trading it off for the knight. Now after bishop takes b2, it's pretty clear that no one is going to be able to win this game. The bishops are of opposite colors, the pawn structure is symmetrical, and neither side really has a huge lead in piece activity here. This game continued with rook c2, rook c8, queen a4, rook c7, and I'm not even going to bother to say these last few moves. We're just going to show them on the board. Why waste my effort on this game, which is so clearly a draw? And they played some more, they played some more, they traded the queens, and then they repeated moves here. And just a fun side note, if you look at this game on Lichess or anything like that, and you click the request engine analysis button, it'll say, you know, something like 1 average cent pawn loss. Like this is about as perfect as a chess game gets, meaning neither side really made any mistakes. That is all to say that with this c5 move, this is really going to be black's equalizing move when white is playing, you know, pretty conservatively against the Ragozin. You know, white trades off this bishop on f6, white just develops his pieces, plays a move like rook c1 to solidify everything. That's when you can go for this move d takes c4 and c5 to solidify everything. I do want to mention it might not be the best idea to play c5 immediately in this position without including d takes c4. Of course, this would be great for us if white played a bad move like bishop e2. Now we are simply gaining a tempo over the other line because this bishop has moved once, but this does allow, of course, white to actually capture on d5. And now after a move like e takes d5 and d takes c5, black is going to be left with this isolated queen pawn, which isn't the worst ever, but there's no reason to allow any of this when you can just capture on c4 immediately. So that's it for game 1. Wesley, Magnus, Carlsen, 2 very good chess players, agreeing to a draw after some good opening play. Up next, I wanted to take a look at a much more exciting game between Viktor Laznicka and Mamedyarov. And this is the game that will hopefully make you actually like the Ragozin a bit more. It shows that it's not just a tool for equalizing. If there's going to be a battle, black is going to have very good chances to both win the battle and have a lot of fun doing it. So let's see this game. They got there via a slightly different move order. One knight f3 from white. Black played knight f6, now c4, e6, d4, and d5. And of course, after knight c3, bishop b4, we arrive at the same starting position. In the previous game, we took a look at bishop g5, and after h6, bishop takes f6. In this game, we're actually going to look at one of the other main options, the third most popular move. Of course, I'm talking about queen a4 check. And at first glance, this looks slightly awkward for the black pieces. The king is attacked, and the bishop is attacked, so of course, there's only one move for black to save everything. You have to play knight c6 to defend the bishop. And A common principle in chess is that you don't really want to develop the knights in front of the pawns. You'll see how white played first c4 and then knight c3, and together this knight and this pawn both control the same squares. It really increases the power of the knight. Here though, black has developed the knight in front of the pawn, and now this pawn is just a little bit stuck on c7. And keeping in mind the previous game, how black just so quickly equalized with the pawn break c5, perhaps this is part of white's idea with queen a4 check. This knight being slightly misplaced on c6 makes it so that black can't play these comfortable breaks quite so easily. We'll see, however, that this knight on c6 is not without its own merits as well, and drawing this queen all the way out to a4, sometimes not always the most comfortable square for that queen either. The game continued with the main line. White simply plays e3, supporting this center. Black went ahead and got castled. And now we see bishop d2, and in the game, black played this move a6, which is not the most common line, but it's certainly one of the most well-respected lines, one of the more common lines. And the idea with a6, of course, is that you're simply threatening to take on c4. For example, if a move like, let's say bishop b2, a very bad move, d takes c4, bishop takes c4, you're not actually threatening to play b5, but you can continue simply with a move like bishop d6 or bishop d7, and the threat of b5 is still going to be there, and you're just keeping these pieces out of this square as well. In the game, queen c2 was played, just bringing this queen back to a slightly more natural square. Its job has been done on a4, getting this knight out to the awkward c6 square. And that's something you'll see white do a lot in the Ragozin, actually. Just drop this queen back into a more comfortable home. In the game, rook e8 was black's choice, and this is really proving that the knight on c6 is perhaps not as misplaced as we first thought. From c6, of course, this knight is very quickly controlling the e5 square, and rook e8 aims to take advantage of that, actually. For example, if white plays a move like bishop e2, now suddenly we might be able to take on c4 and already break with this move e5. This is one of the most common breaks in the Ragozin, as I was mentioning earlier, c5 or e5, depending on how white plays. And when white plays like this, drawing this knight out to c6, controlling this square, e5 becomes a lot more of a realistic option. In the game, white simply plays a3, and in the Ragozin, we're not super interested in giving up this bishop for this knight always. It was more there to just kind of temporarily misplace some white pieces, put on some uncomfortable pressure. So we're just going to drop this bishop back to d6. Now, h3 is a common choice from white. It's just kind of a waiting, improving move, guarding the g4 square, and not yet developing this bishop, and not yet committing to c takes d5, which would allow this bishop to develop itself either to g4 or even e6. Now, h6 from black aims to do very, very similar things, delaying developing this bishop, waiting for white to take on d5 so that we have this more natural option of bishop e6. Now, c takes d5, e takes d5 is played. White couldn't really find any more improving moves, and now bishop d3. And we actually don't see bishop e6 from black. There have been 3 games in the Elite Chess database in this position. Bishop e6 was played twice, and then in this game, Mamedyarov is the only player to play the move bishop d7. And this was a really interesting idea from Shak. On the surface, it looks like a pretty innocuous move. It's not really doing much. You get the bishop off the back rank, you defend some squares. But it's actually fighting for quite a lot here. And we'll see his idea pretty quickly here after the move b4. And I want to say, perhaps after b4, black already might have a slight edge here due to Mamedyarov's next move. So if you think you can find Mamedyarov's idea at home here, I encourage you to take a moment, try and see if you can figure out the meaning of this move, bishop d7. And go ahead, pause the video, see if you can do it. If not, I'm about to give you the answer, so here we go. His idea, of course, is knight a7. And this move is a little bit of a wild one. You don't often expect to see knight a7. But the idea is very, very clear. black has put this rook on e8 and this knight on f6 and this pawn on d5. He wants to control the e4 square. Now, if he had put his bishop on e6, this e4 square control would be a little bit less there, because it's blocking his own rook off, of course, and white would have plenty of pieces covering. But now, with this bishop on d7, the rook still participates, and the bishop also guards this b5 square. So what we're going to see from black is he's aiming for knight b5 to shake loose this knight from c3, and from there, he's going to sink this knight onto e4 and hope to use this knight effectively to gain some kind of advantage. And I really like this idea from Shak, and it worked out well for him in the game. White aimed for knight a4 here, trying to sink this knight onto c5. Black has the very natural move b6 to prevent this from happening, and now white simply retreats back to c3. And this maneuver as well, I'm not really in love with for white here. It does waste a lot of time. The goal for white, which he actually achieved, was that this pawn is now backwards and going to be slightly more difficult to defend, but this bishop is currently doing a very nice job of locking down this c7 pawn. And I don't think it's really a huge deal for black, and in the end, it probably didn't end up being worth the time that white spent. Now, Shak, of course, continues with his idea, plays knight b5, and white plays knight e2 to step out of this idea. Now, very logical chess from Shak Mamedyarov. Knight e4 follows up. And we are starting to leave the opening here, but the key points I wanted to get across in this opening were, one, this idea of waiting with black with h6 is very, very nice. You just save a tempo by not bringing this bishop out to d7 just yet, kind of holding your cards back a bit, waiting for white to be the one to commit. Now, if white had wasted more time with a move like rook d1, now black might actually go ahead and capture on c4 and go in for something like this rather than allow white to take on d5. But in the game, so h6 was important, and then this bishop d7 idea I really like. You can make use of this e4 square in your own games in the Ragozin like this, even if you don't combine it with this slightly strange looking knight a7 to b5 idea. So these are the two opening ideas that Shak really showed in this game, and they worked out well for him. It is a very beautiful game, so I do want to show you the entirety of it. Knight a7, knight a4, we saw all this. Knight e2, knight e4, of course, continuing through, now making use of this e4 square. And now white decided he needed to play a4 to kick this knight off of this nice b5 square. Knight a7 back was black's choice. White simply gets castled, and now this knight comes out to c6, putting more pressure on these white pawns, which are now advancing perhaps uncomfortably far up the board. b5 from white, black goes ahead and opens up this a file, and now black inserts this move, knight takes d2. This move could have been inserted at a couple points, but Shak waited until now to play it. It's perfectly fine. White doesn't have anything better than to recapture here. If you take on c6, for example, well, I'm just going to take on f3 and take on h3, and then you're busted. So queen takes d2, and now knight b4. And this idea from white is, or from black rather, is effectively winning the bishop pair here. There's no real comfortable way to save this bishop. You can play a move like knight c3 perhaps, but knight takes d3 is still going to be playable here. And yeah, just no comfortable way to save this bishop. You can't play bishop b1, hangs the rook on a1, and if you insert this move and then play bishop b1, well, you're giving up this pawn as well. So black wins the bishop pair, and this is a common thing you'll actually see in the Ragozin. It's kind of counterintuitive. You play bishop b4, threatening a knight with your bishop, but in the end, black is most often the one that ends up with the bishop pair due to this bishop g5, bishop takes f6 move being so common. But enough of that. We'll continue on here with knight takes d3, queen takes d3, and now bishop e6. And what we see here is just a very, very comfortable position for black, and it's one in which I think black is really playing for the win here. I don't think white has too much to play for. There is this weak pawn on c7, there is this e5 square, but in the end, two bishops are just always going to be so strong in a position like this. And Shak managed to show that in the game. Knight e5 was played, trying to make use of this square, but now f6 from black. This is the proper way to play against the knights. You take away their outposts. Knight c6, queen d7. And this knight on c6 looks nice, but at the end of the day, it's not really achieving a whole lot. It's not hitting any weak points, and these squares aren't particularly important for the black pieces. So we saw f3 from white, and this move is actually just a little bit too weakening, I think. White perhaps had grand intentions of playing e4, but we'll see those never really come to fruition. Queen f7 was played in the game. Now, of course, if e4, we're going to take this and play bishop c4. No matter how you capture here, bishop c4 would win. And white immediately kind of gave up on this e4 idea and continued through with f4. Now, black actually chose to take on a1, and after takes on a1, we saw bishop d7. And the reason black included this was because he wanted to put pressure on the e3 pawn and not have his rook be drawn away to the a file. So now it turns out white is the one with the more relevant backwards pawn. White has no way to attack c7, and black is doing very, very nicely here. The game continued with rook a2, and black pulls out a nice idea with h5, king f2, and h4. Sometimes it's good to just take your space. There's no real comfortable way for white to try to win this pawn immediately, and so this is just going to be a helpful attacker for black. King g1 was played, now g6. Rook e2 is overprotecting this pawn. King g7 just solidifies everything, uses this king to guard these pawns. Now queen b1, bishop f5 hits the queen, queen d1, queen e6, and black has just improved his pieces greatly here. This bishop is a monster. This bishop is actually a little bit caught behind this f4 pawn, but we'll see there's some latent pressure there. It also controls some nice squares on the queen side. And after queen d2, we see rook a8, and together with this rook and all of these pieces aimed at the king, black is just completely crushing. Rook e1 was played, trying to keep the rook out, but now rook a3 is still invading. Rook f1 is simply passing the time, nothing else for white to really do. We see rook b3, and I want to make note, this knight on c6 is not contributing to this game at all. In fact, it's a little bit stuck on the c6 square. Rook a1 now from white tries to invade, but of course black plays bishop a3, keeping that rook out. Now after rook a2, bishop b1, there's nothing better for white than to take this bishop, and after rook takes, black has now given up this light squared bishop in exchange for getting this rook to the first rank with a devastating attack. We see king h2, and now bishop c1 is getting at the base of this pawn chain. Queen e1 tries to hold on via a pin, and now black could of course capture this pawn and go in for just this totally winning endgame, but that's not really the style of Shak Mamedyarov. He plays queen e4 instead. And after rook a7, I encourage you at home to try and find Shak Mamedyarov's idea here. There is more than one winning move, but I encourage you to find the idea that Shak found in the game. It's a fun one. Okay, go ahead, pause the video now. All right, I'll show it to you. Of course, bishop takes e3 is technically winning the game. You do have to deal with some annoying checks. Let's say king f8, rook c8 check, king f7, rook c7, and at the end of the day, you are once again going to be in a completely winning endgame. Of course, that was not Shak Mamedyarov's idea. He's too cool for that. He plays the move, queen takes f4. And this is the killer move that shows really why white's position is hopeless. Of course, you cannot take this piece. Bishop takes f4, and you have to play g3 to avoid getting checkmated. And now I can simply capture and check and take this piece. And now once again we do have a winning endgame, but it's simply going to be 3 pawns up for black. So this is much more conclusive than the other lines. So this queen is uncapturable. King h1 was played in the game, and now of course Shak Mamedyarov just continues to style on his opponent, plays the move queen f2, says, please take my queen. White, of course, cannot capture this queen either due to the same reason with bishop takes e3, when this queen will fall. Now, rook takes c7, king h6 is played. White tries queen d1 to keep the game going. Now, of course, Mamedyarov plays queen e2. Please take my queen. This time you can't take, not because you win the queen, but because you get checkmated after a nice little dance with this bishop to the g3 square. So queen g1 was played, and now queen takes e3. Once again, please take my queen. This time it's defended, though, of course. Regardless, queen f1, and now queen f4 is forking white's major pieces. Queen d3 was played, and rook a1 was Shak's simple solution to this. Now the rook is hanging, bishop e3 with mate is threatened, and there's really nothing to be done for white. So Viktor went ahead and resigned this position. So a very fun game from Shak Mamedyarov, a very fun game for Ragozin players to look at. Once again, the key points of this game are, one, making use of this knight being on c6, threatening to do things like play this move e5. That's the advantage to having the knight on c6. Getting this knight drawn out with tempo is going to help you control this square a lot faster. Other things to note, of course, we don't want to trade this bishop on c3, and we do this nice waiting move so we don't have to commit to anything with our bishop. Then after takes, this bishop d7 idea is very nice to control this square and to prepare this nice knight maneuver, not pawn b5, but rather knight b5. And from there, Shak Mamedyarov just played a very, very nice game in order to win. Okay, let's take a look at our third game for the day. This was a game between Tania Sachdev and Vitali Golod. Of course, Tania, friend of the St. Louis Chess Club, she's done some commentary stuff for us. But unfortunately for her, she ended up losing this game to Vitali. This game, of course, started with the Ragozin. What else would it be? This class is about the Ragozin. No surprises here. Not knight c3, but rather knight f3 was played. d5, knight c3, and now bishop b4. And from here, we've looked at bishop g5, which is the most popular move, queen a4 check, which is the third most popular move. Now we're going to take a look at the second most popular move, which is, of course, c takes d5, solving this tension in the center immediately. Black recaptures with the pawn, and now after bishop g5, we have a very similar position to the initial game after h6, and in fact, we could in fact transpose into some of those lines with takes on f6 here. But in this game, we're going to look at the more interesting option for white, which is bishop h4. This is going to prove to be a much more exciting game, a much more exciting game than the games in which white simply captures on f6. And the reason for that is black has a ton of interesting options here. The most popular move is actually c5, immediately challenging the center, but I'm going to recommend the second most popular move, g5, because it's a lot more fun to play g5 in the opening. Bishop g3 is, of course, white's only try. And now you have to play knight e4 with black. This is the big idea. You put a lot of pressure on white's position immediately. And now there are a few moves that have been tried here with white, but really the only real move to worry about is knight d2. White needs to challenge this knight in the center pretty much immediately, or else he's going to risk falling into a much worse position. For example, if something like rook c1 is played, this move has been tried a few times, you're going to run into this idea from black, h5, with the simple idea of continuing on with h4. And that would more or less be trapping this bishop. And this is a very awkward threat for white to try to solve. If you move this h-pawn anywhere, well, we're simply going to capture on g3, play the move g4, and this is not really what white is hoping for on the king side here. Now, there are some tricky lines here with queen a4 check, and white challenging these pieces immediately, but black can just develop simply with moves like bishop d7, and at the end of the day, sorry, not queen a3, but rather queen b3, this h4 move is going to come through on the board, and it will probably prove to be a fun game, but I'm not going to recommend you spend all your time booking up on this. It's pretty unlikely that you'll find it in your own games. Much more common is knight d2 with a good game for white. I'm going to recommend knight takes g3. You can take on c3 and go for this pawn here, but I don't like how much time white ends up getting in this line. For example, you cannot really take on e5 due to this check, and this square is now covered. So you have to like retreat or go to b2 even, and this stuff just gets a little bit uncomfortable for my taste. So I'm going to recommend, instead of going for the pawn, instead of being greedy, we take the bishop pair in true Ragozin style. That's kind of what this opening is about for me, getting the bishop pair and trying to use it to your advantage. So h takes g3 is the natural response, putting some pressure on h6. And now things are going to calm down a bit from the craziness we saw with h6 and g5 and knight e4. You know, we made all these crazy threats against the bishop, and what did we gain for it? Well, we got to take this bishop off the board. Now it's time to calm down and develop our pieces. So c6 from black defends this pawn, prepares to drop this bishop back and get developed with these other pieces. e3 from white makes sense. Bishop e6 is black's choice. You can come out to the f5 square as well, just to keep an eye on this diagonal, but bishop e6 makes some sense as well. Helps support this e6 pawn for any eventual c5 breaks you might think about. Bishop d3 does grab this diagonal. Knight d7, queen c2, queen e7. Now a3 from white, and bishop d6. And in this type of position, actually, neither side really wants to castle kingside. If white castles kingside, he's really going to be in a world of hurt after h5 and h4, breaking open this h-file. And after white castles queenside, as she did in the game, if black castles kingside, of course, you're just dropping this pawn. So both sides castle queenside. And now, really, I'm going to say the only move for white here that makes any sense to my eyes is this move knight b5. You need to take off this bishop pair for black, or else you're going to be in some significant trouble. King b1 has been tried in some random game, but king b8, and now this bishop is going to be surviving. And I like black's position here quite a lot. So knight b5, king b8 makes a lot of sense, break the pin, knight takes d6, queen takes d6, and now king b1, stepping off this c-file. And this is the position where I wanted to kind of pause. We're nearing the end of the opening here. In fact, you could call the opening over at this point. And let's take stock of what we have in this position and which side we would rather be. So some notable features of the position. White's pawns over here are doubled, meaning black has this h-pawn, whereas white does not. Now, this could prove to be either an advantage or a disadvantage, depending on what happens in the game. Of course, if this pawn remains backwards, then white is going to be able to stack up rooks against it and put a lot of pressure on this backwards pawn. However, if black can use it to his advantage, perhaps pushing this pawn up the board, then it could just be a nice, some nice extra space on the king side for black. Other notable features of the position, of course, there's another difference in the pawn structure. White has an e-pawn, whereas black has a c-pawn here. Kind of the quote-unquote Carlsbad structure. And what that means in this position is that black is actually going to be the one with a little bit more freedom to play some pawn breaks. The reason for that is if white ever goes, let's say h5, as was played in the game, if white ever goes for this move e4, well, you're kind of running into some weaknesses on this d4 pawn. And this bishop, being on a light square, is going to be unable to defend this pawn, and it's also going to give black this very nice d5 square. And all of this means that white is not very free to play this move e4. This isn't really a move white wants to play. And so that's not a pawn break for white, whereas this move c5 is actually going to be something black can consider. The reason for that being, this bishop supports this pawn very nicely on d5, and it also allows black some ideas of opening things up even further with the move d4, expanding in the center to activate the pieces. So for those reasons, even though this position is likely just equal, I really prefer playing the black side here. Black simply has more ideas than white, and we'll see in this game, white kind of got shoehorned into going after this h-pawn, and that allowed black some more freedom to play on the queen side and actually end up winning this game. So h5, of course, is the move to prevent this pawn from being backwards and to continue pushing it up the board. Tania chose rook c1 here, which looks a little bit strange, but perhaps was aimed at preventing this move c5. And now black simply continues with h4, taking more space on this king side. G takes h4 is natural for white to undouble the pawns. And now knight f3 puts more pressure onto this pawn. Now there are actually still two games here. There's a game between some 2700s, being Nikita Vityugov and Alexander Moisenko. And that game went h3, and the players really didn't want to play a game of chess anymore. They were ready to trade off the pieces and go for a draw. Just to show you, the game went g takes h3, and now with these pawns traded off, the rooks come off, white plays bishop f5, and the bishops come off. Well, one of the bishops come off after queen f6, and we trade it for this knight. Now queen f5, and the queens come off. Now king c7, rook h1, king d6, rook h6, king e7, and the final minor pieces come off, and they agreed to a draw. But fortunately for us, we don't have to play like 2700s. We can still try to win some chess games. So instead of h3, Vitali went for queen e7 here, maintaining this pawn on h4. And I think here, white might already be starting to get into just a little bit of trouble. I think it might be time for white to try to bail out with a move like bishop f5, and either taking on e6 or dropping back to h3, just contesting this bishop on this diagonal as soon as possible. Of course, this isn't really going to be threatening to the black player. Trading off these bishops just brings the position closer to a draw, but there's still some stuff to play for. In the game, though, Tania went for rook h2 with some ideas of doubling up against this pawn and trying to win it outright. Queen f6 was the nice hidden idea behind queen e7. We're not just defending this pawn, but we're putting some pressure along this f-file as well. Tania played rook c to h1, and now h3 is the nice idea by Vitali to pressure this knight and force some uncomfortable decisions for Tania on this king side. Knight e1 was her choice, stepping out of this threat, threatening to take on h3. And now I'll let you at home try and find the idea to get a significant advantage for black in this position. See if you can find how to get a significant edge here for the black pieces. Go ahead, take your time. Don't want to rush you, but I am now going to tell you the answer. The move, of course, is c5. And the point is, after a move like d takes c5, let's say rook c8, hitting this pawn, b4, we can play a move, we can start with something like h takes g2 if we want, and let's say knight takes g2, trade off one set of rooks. But the point is, knight e5 is going to be a very difficult move for white to meet. And this is what I mean by black having more options here. Black played on the king side, white diverted all of her pieces over to this king side to kind of deal with this h-pawn, try to win it. And this allows black to play both in the center and on the queen side of the board as well. Black has this mobility to switch between sides of the board. Of course, the problem for white is that all of these pieces are lined up, and it's going to be difficult to prevent an uncomfortable skewer from happening. For example, if you play a move like king c1 just to step out of it, well, immediately you're stepping into checkmating threats. And if you play a move like, I don't know, knight h4, for example, just to guard this square, well, we can do a variety of things, including bringing our rook into the game. The black pieces are just kind of walking all over the white pieces here. If you try something like bishop h7 to step out of this, well, now knight c4 is going to come. And really, just black's activity, any move is good for black, and the white king is really going to suffer. So c5 would have been nice in the game immediately. In the game, black chose the slightly less accurate rook c8, but it ended up being good enough for him. Here, I think you might be able to guess the move I'm going to recommend for white. In the game, g takes h3 was played, and c5 broke through on the board, and black still managed to get a nice edge. So of course, I think the move b4 might have been called for by white here, just putting a stop to these c5 ideas for the moment, giving white some more time. Instead, though, we see takes, c5, queen c3 from white, and now rook h4 is the nice move to force white to make a decision about this pawn. D takes c5 was played, queen takes c3, and now knight takes c5, and once again, While black is technically down a pawn, the white pawns are all pretty fractured and weak, and black's pieces are much more active. You see these two rooks on the h-file, not really making a good impression, stopped up behind this h-pawn. The game continued with knight f3, and now rook takes h3 was black's tactical idea. Takes, 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 but now the bishop falls, and black has regained the pawn, and all of these pawns remain very, very weak, and this was enough for black to convert this position. Rook h7 was played in the game, knight takes f2, rook takes f7, knight e4, hitting the c3 pawn. Knight e5, we simply take, rook d7, rook takes e3, and here Tania actually just resigned. This game was a pretty nice one by black, and it shows how even in the more equal lines like this one, black can still find a lot of chances. The bishops are always going to be powerful pieces, and it's normally black who actually ends up with more options here in this structure in particular. It allows for more mobility of the pawns, more options for black. And now I think I'm going to go over just one more game super quickly for you guys. It's a game of my own that I played against a 2000 rated youngster by the name of Alex Zhang here at the St. Louis Chess Club. He's a very talented kid. I'm sure give him a couple years, he'll be much better than me. But in this game, this one managed to go my way, and I just wanted to show you what a practical game at a slightly lower level looks like in the Ragozin defense. Knight c3, bishop b4, queen a4 check, knight c6 is the only move, bishop g5. And then I'm going to be honest with you here, before this lecture, I didn't know a whole lot about the Ragozin. I did a fair amount of prep to get this ready for you guys, and so I was playing this opening pretty much unprepared in the Ragozin defense. And so I didn't know what to do after bishop g5. I wasn't super familiar with this idea. And in fact, it's not really the most common move. Normally e3 is played, and that's the one that we looked at earlier. But okay, after bishop g5, h6 I knew was a common idea for black, and it turns out it's correct here. And now white really needs to take this knight off on f6 here. But this is not what was played in the game. If this was played, then the play would have continued very simply, much like the games we've looked at previously, where bishop takes f6 happens. But in the game, white chose bishop f4. And now I'm going to try to challenge you guys to find some interesting ideas here for black. There are a few really good options for black in this position. I chose one of them. Perhaps the least clear of the ideas, but it still ended up working out for me. So go ahead, pause the video, try to come up with some ideas, and I'm going to introduce them to you. All right, here we go. Of course, the move I played in the game is bishop d7, and this was a pretty tricky move that I played, actually, and it ends up giving black a nice little advantage here. I'll explain the point in greater detail in just a second. I wanted to talk about some other ideas for black. The move knight e4 is also pretty comfortable for black, but I don't think it gives as much as bishop d7. White would simply play rook c1 here, and then you can see things like d takes c4, and queen d5 actually is just an annoying way for black to try to hold on to this pawn. So this is one way of playing for black. Something like knight e4, taking this pawn off the board, looking for these queen d5 ideas. Things like this are pretty comfortable for black. I think bishop d7, though, might actually give black the greatest edge here. In the game, my opponent very naturally dropped this queen back to c2. Of course, there is a fun tactic in the Ragozin. After e3, simply knight takes d4 is winning a pawn. You cannot capture this bishop due to this check, getting all of the white pieces. And this discovered attack, of course, is allowing black to capture here. So queen c2 is played. And now the deeper idea behind bishop d7. See if you can find it. What did I play in this position here? All right, hopefully you all found it at home already. The idea, of course, is g5. I started with bishop d7 to actually free up this knight. I no longer have to babysit this bishop. I'm no longer pinned. So this knight now can challenge this d4 pawn. And this is the idea behind g5. If white plays the more comfortable, bishop g3, you're going to get hit with g4. No matter what you do, I'm breaking through and winning your d4 pawn immediately. So of course, instead, my opponent plays the more testing bishop e5. I continue with g4 anyways, bringing this knight back to d2, and now I simply take on e5, and after takes on e5, the idea is d4. And this is how I, first off, won the bishop pair, as I often like to do in the Ragozin. As I said, that's kind of what this opening is about for me. And secondly, I gained some very nice space in the center with this move d4. And it's going to be really, really awkward now for white to deal with this. The line taking on f6 doesn't really work out well for white. I can take on c3, and after you take back, I actually have the very annoying move queen takes f6 when you're all pinned up. And this is just going to be really, really great for black, actually. So instead, my opponent played the best move, knight d1, just trying to hold on to everything. Now, of course, my knight is actually attacked, so I chose knight h5, aiming for some squares. And my opponent played the slightly nonchalant e3. Turns out, probably my opponent needed to play a bit more quickly with something like a3, just evicting this bishop immediately from its b4 outpost. After e3, I played the simple move bishop c6, improving this bishop to a better diagonal. Now, a3 did come on the board for my opponent. I dropped this bishop back to e7, and my opponent now continued through with the move b4. And it turns out this move is actually just a bit of a mistake. Black is tactically winning by force already here. And I'll let you at home try to find it. I actually did not find it in the game because I was being a bit silly and I was afraid of a move I should not have been afraid of. The move, of course, is d takes e3, when after the move knight takes e3, queen d4 is a simple fork of these two pieces, and black is just going to be winning this pawn as well as likely the game. For some reason in my head, I was concerned with the move f takes e3, which of course is simply ridiculous, bishop h4 check, and this is why this bishop on c6 is here. Puts some very nice pressure on this diagonal, so the move g3 isn't really playable. And this, of course, is just totally crushing. Something like king e2, now something like queen g5, and we're breaking through on all fronts. And you can start playing some really fun stuff here, like bishop g3, to get at this pawn. But that's beside the point. I missed it in the game. I played the move bishop h4, trying to actually just improve d takes e3, but my opponent played the best move now, b5, not really giving me time to do all this. I still play d takes e3, knight takes e3, and now queen d4. And the move I missed in my calculations, of course, white's best move, queenside castles, is actually saving everything. Unpinning from this pawn and saving the rook by moving out of the way, taking advantage of the fact that you get to move two pieces at the same time when you castle. But it turns out here, black actually still has a nice advantage after bishop takes f2. My opponent actually missed queenside castles in the game. Perhaps he didn't realize it was legal. I didn't realize it was legal from afar, so it's slightly understandable. Now, b takes c6 was his choice, but of course, I'm simply winning too many pieces here, and the game quickly resolved after a few more moves. I think maybe a few more moves were played after this in the game, but it's not really worth looking at. Black's just up a full rook, and the white king is in shambles. So that was my introduction to the Ragozin. Hopefully you learned a lot about some common ideas for black and feel comfortable enough to try it out for yourself. I definitely encourage you to do so. It's a very fun opening. It's one of the more active choices for black against the Queen's Gambit, rather than going for your standard Queen's Gambit decline positions where it just ends up a bit boring and a bit sad for black, in my opinion. So that's it. That's the Ragozin. Thank you very much for joining me for this episode of Chess Openings Explained, and I will see you next time.